At the Games Village, India's athletes who will be taking part in Friday's opening ceremony on the river are counting minutes and hours. They will be on boats for only 45 minutes for a ceremony that will last close to 4 hours. But by the time they leave the village in the afternoon and return late at night, it will have taken an average of 7 hours and 40 minutes. During this period, they would have walked a minimum of 940 meters and maximum of 2300 meters, but would have spent approximately 5 hours minutes standing. 5 hours standing. They will be provided crackers, muesli bars, fruit and nuts, water bottles, and life jackets. These are the estimates provided by the organizers so that the athletes are prepared for the big show that will take place at a night before competition begins. As it turns out, this is among the few aspects of the ceremony that's known with certainty. The rest is shrouded in mystery. In the city centre, roughly half an hour away from the village, two uniformed men with thick British accents guard a sanitized bridge and talk about a pair of big mysterious eyes prouding from under a white sheet on the left bank of the river. A prop for Friday evening, not a security threat. Opposition party Thursday continued their attack on the National Democratic Alliance government in Rajya Sabha, criticizing the budget on issues of taxes, farm incomes and unemployment. On the second day of budget discussion, the opposition charge was led by Congress Randeep Surjewala, Aam Aadmi Party Raghav Chadha and independent member Kapil Sibal. Opposition MPs also criticized the budget for ignoring the aspirations of other states while favouring Bihar and Andhra with a slew of project announcements. BJP MPs Medha Kulkarni and former Minister of State Bhagwat Karad countered the opposition's criticism, listing out the government's allocation to the other states and highlighting schemes targeted for farmer and youth welfare. Randeep Surjewala, who was the first to speak during the budget discussion on Thursday, charged the government with failure to fulfill their promise of doubling income of farmers. When the finance minister began the budget speech with three words, farmers, poor and youth, the whole nation was filled with expectations, but within a few minutes it was clear that this budget is Kursi Bachao, Sahyogi Dal Patao or Har La Badla this and this. AAP's Raghav Chadha said that the budget has managed to displease all sections of the society, including BJP supporters. Chadha added that the government needs to do a comprehensive review of the taxation and restore indexation on long-term capital gains. Removal of indexation, he said, will disincentivize long-term investment, undervalue properties and led to high influx of black money. Prime Minister Modi will visit the Kargil War Memorial on Friday to pay homage to the bravehearts who made the supreme sacrifice in the line of duty, his office said on Thursday. He will also carry out the first blast of the Shinkun La Tunnel project virtually. On the occasion of the 25th Kargil Vijay Divas on 26 July 24, PM Modi will visit the Kargil War Memorial at around 9:20 am and pay homage to the bravehearts who made the supreme sacrifice in the line of duty, the PMO said. In a post on X, Modi said that July 26 is a very special day for every Indian. We will mark the 25th Kargil Vijay Divas. It's a day to pay homage to all those who protect our nation. I will visit the Kargil War Memorial and pay tributes to our brave heroes. Work will also commence for the Shinkun La Tunnel project, the PM said on Thursday. India and China on Thursday discussed complete disengagement along the line of actual control at the earliest and normalcy in bilateral relations. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar met his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi on the sidelines of the ASEAN meetings in Vientiane, Laos to review the situation and took forward the discussions held in their last meeting in Astana earlier this month, the Ministry of External Affairs said in a statement. The meeting gave the two ministers an opportunity to review the situation since their last meeting at Astana on July 4. Their talks focused on finding an early resolution of the remaining issues along the line of actual control to stabilize and rebuild bilateral relations, the statement said. Both ministers agreed to need to work with purpose and urgency to achieve complete disengagement at the earliest. Peace and tranquility on the borders and respect for LAC are essential for normalcy in bilateral relations, the two leaders agreed. Both sides must abide by relevant bilateral agreements, protocols and understandings reached between the two governments in the past, said the MEA statement. Those industries which are practically non-polluting and categorized under the white category by the Central Pollution Control Board will now not require prior permission of the state pollution control boards to establish and operate under the Air Act 1981 and Water Act 1974, according to the two separate draft notifications of the Environment Ministry. These permissions now officially as consent to establish and consent to operate are granted to regulate industries that discharge effluents or emit pollutants into the environment. The ministry has also proposed to do away with the CTE permit for projects activities that require prior environmental clearance. The CTE is granted by the State Pollution Control Board concerned, carrying either standard or specific conditions to be adhered to for complying with pollution norms. Now, with the draft notification proposing to do away with the CTE permit, these conditions could be merged with the environment clearance granted by the Ministry of Environment. As per the Water Act 1974 and the Air Act 1981, the CTE or a NOC is required before the commencement of the construction activities and the CTO before starting operation of units like individual establishment from the State Pollution Control Board concerned. The Karnataka Legislative Assembly on Thursday passed resolutions against the upcoming delimitation exercise, One Nation One Election system and the National Eligibility cum Entrance Test. The resolution on the delimitation exercise to redraw boundaries for Lok Sabha and Assembly constituencies and increasing their numbers pressed the centre to carry it out based on pollution enumerated in the 1971 census and not on the new census carried out in 2026 or later. This was tabled by Law and Parliamentary Affairs Minister H.K. Patil, even as opposition BJP legislators continued their dharna in the well of the House demanding discussion on Mysuru Urban Development Authority scheme. Leader of the opposition R. Ashoka said that though they were in favor of the resolution, a separate discussion should be taken up before it was passed. The Speaker UT Khade then put the resolution moved on behalf of the CM to vote and was passed. Old schemes with new brandings that appear to be the recent theme as Odisha Chief Minister Mohan Charan Majhi's maiden budget was presented in the State Assembly on Thursday. The state's total budget outlay was Rs 2.65 lakh crore, 15% over the last budget under the previous Biju Janata Dal government. Of this, it has set aside a whopping Rs 10,000 crore for the much hyped Subhadra Yojana, a scheme that promises financial assistance to women and help the BJP win a majority and its own in Odisha for the first time. Under Subhadra, planned to launch on September 17, Prime Minister Modi's birthday, the government has plans to give vouchers of up to Rs 50,000 to women, which can be encashed in 2 years. The guidelines for this are still in the works. To fulfill another one of its election promises, that of paddy procurement of Rs 3,100 per quintal, the government made a provision of Rs 5,000 crore. The promised price is Rs 800 more than the minimum support price that the centre offers and had gained a much traction on the ground at the time of assembly polls in May. The keenly awaited NISAR space mission, a first of its kind collaborative exercise between the space agencies of India and the United States, it seems will not happen this year. NISAR did not figure in the list of missions of the Indian Space Research Organisation submitted to the Lok Sabha on Thursday in response to a question on space missions to be launched this year. NISAR, which stands for NASA ISRO Synthetic Aperture Radar, is designed to make extremely granular observations of the Earth at regular intervals. The satellite is powerful enough to capture changes as small as 1 centimeter in size during its repeated observations over the same terrain. It will therefore be able to study the dynamic processes happening on Earth's surface, like retreat of glaciers, changes in vegetation and forest cover, and even the movement during earthquakes and volcanoes. Scientists expect this satellite to provide new insight into our understandings of processes like climate change or natural hazards. NISAR was slated for a launch in the first half of this year, and the satellite had been put together in the United States after one of the two radars and some other components had been flown in from India had been delivered to Bengaluru last year. However, in further testing, one of the key components, a 12-meter large antenna, was discovered to be in need of some improvement. The spacecraft had to be shipped back to the United States earlier this year for the upgrade. ISRO in the meanwhile had maintained that it was still hopeful for a launch in the second half of the year. The response to the Parliament question, however, shows that the launch might not be part of the plan this year. If the revolution cannot even deliver the petty amenities and minor humanities that animate the struggle of its subject, then there is not much to be said. All these more reason than to respect the weapons of the weak. All the more reason to see in the tenacity of preservation, truculence in irony, in petty acts of non-compliance, in foot-dragging, is dissimulation, in the disbelief in elite homilies, in steady, grinding efforts to hold one's own against overwhelming odds, a spirit and practice that prevents the worst and promise something better. These stirring words were written by James S. Scott, Yale professor of political science, who died on July 19, aged 87. These are also the closing lines of Weapons of the Weak, a modern-day masterpiece of social science which not only reshaped the study of peasant resistance but subaltern resistance in general. It gave the powerless a new kind of agency. What was Scott trying to say about peasant behavior? Where did he make his empirical discovery? What impact did it give? Was he right? Scott grew up in a generation that was fascinated with peasant rebellions, not simply on the left side but also on the right. After the Communist Revolution of China and the Great Resistance in Vietnam, the right was willing to argue, give the peasantry a piece of land and it will be the most conservative class in society. But if you deprive the peasant of land, he will rise in rebellion and topple the order. But by the 1970s, large parts of the left, though ideologically in favor of peasant ownership, were also beginning to doubt the utility of peasant rebellions. The agrarian convulsions under Mao Zedong, the most towering peasant leader of the 20th century, were coming to light. The Maoist polity was supposedly based on peasant power, but between 30 to 40 million peasants starved to death during the Great Leap Forward and a few million during the stringent early years of the Cultural Revolution. Yet Mao paid little attention for the petty amenities and minor humanities that the peasant deserved. Scott on the left found such revolutionary excess agonizing. His earlier great work, The Moral Economy of the Peasant, was archives based. He understood peasants' life firsthand. He spent nearly 2 years immersed in a Malaysian village. He absorbed the local dialect. He learned about peasants from the moment opened his eyes in the morning until closed them at night, working by a kerosene lamp and bitten by bugs, though sometimes Coker did come in form of Jane Austen, Zola and Balzac. Revolutionary excesses aside, these were also an opposite challenge to deal with. Antony Gramsci, a Marxist critic of fascism who died in Mussolini prison in 1937, had become popular in left circle for concept of hegemony. Paris, the city of love, has a very special place in the hearts of Indian sport lovers. The French capital is the venue for the ongoing 53rd Olympics of the modern era, the third time it is hosting the Summer Games since it was revived in 1896. It also marks a century since India formally sent its first contingent to the Olympic Games in Paris in 1924. Note just that Paris was also the venue of the 1900 Olympics, the second since Athens in 1896, where an Indian athlete won 2 silver medals on the track, the first ever medals for the country. The first contingent from India, comprising 4 track athletes and 2 wrestlers, was in fact sent 4 years earlier to the 1920 Olympics in Antwerp, Belgium, but the selection for that team was an ad hoc affair as the establishment of the National Olympic Body was still 4 years away. It was Dorabji Tata, with scarce funds at his disposal and practically non-existent organization and infrastructure, who was behind their selection. Just as his father Jamshedji Tata is called the father of modern industry in India, his eldest son Dorabji is recognized as the pioneer of the Indian Olympic movement. As president of the Deccan Gymkhana in Pune, he hastily arranged selection trials in Pune and Bombay just 2 months after getting permission from the International Olympic Committee to send the contingent. Tata, naturally enough, was appointed president of the All India Olympic Committee when it was formed in 1924, just in the time of the Paris Olympics. Now came the time to choose the first formal Olympic squad from India. This time the planning was far more meticulous. The athletes were chosen from the All India Olympic meet was staged at Delhi's Roshan Hara Club grounds. The first time athletes from all over the country took part in the national meet. The efficient organization, access to funds and pan-India selection process were all in stark contrast to the hasty manner in which the team was chosen for Antwerp. 8 track and field athletes as well as 5 male and 2 female tennis players were chosen for Paris, and though they made barely a ripple, Paris 24 did not mark the first time Indian women were competing at the Olympics. That quest is now in its 40th year. I have managed to trace Richard's life with plenty of help along the way from fellow researchers, practically from his birth in 1875 to his death in California in 1929. This culminated in 18 with the magical discovery of Norman's descendants living in England. Yet myths and doubts persist over Richard's life and career in sports and movies. He acted in a number of plays in London's West End and in silent movies in Hollywood after leaving India in 1905. These myths crop up every 4 years when the Olympics roll by. One of them that he happened to be in Paris as a tourist during the Olympics, indicating he was a casual athlete. That is far from the truth. In fact, he was one of the leading sprinters and hurdlers of his era and took part in numerous meets in London just prior to the Olympics. The other that surely should be put to rest by now is the contention by some British historians that he was representing Great Britain, not India. That has been disproved by the IOC, as the medals have been credited to India in their official records. Indeed, unlike many sportspersons were born outside Britain and moved there later in life, Richard's family roots in India go back 3 generations to 1780s and extend 2 more generations after him into the 1940s. All his education was in India, and his prowess in a variety of sports, athletics, rowing, rugby, golf, tennis and football, blossomed during his years in India. The newspaper has an Olympics connection too. Sport editor C.S.A. Swamy, who retired from the Indian Express, Madras 1984, ran the marathon at the 1936 Berlin Olympics, finishing 37th out of 56 runners, despite being seriously ill with parathyroid. Gold prices continue to fall for the third day and tumbled rupees 1000 from 70,650 per 10 grams in the local market here on Thursday amid heavy selling by jewelers triggered by a fall in rates in overseas markets. Meanwhile, the rupee also declined 1 paisa to close to an all-time low of 83.72 against the US dollar, dragged down by demand for the American currency in the overseas market and significant foreign fund outflows. Forex traders said that the fall in domestic unit came on the heels of a significant downturn in the Indian equity market sparked by the government's decision to hike the tax rate on capital gains. The rupee dropped by 7 paisa to close to an all-time low at 83.78 against the US dollar on Thursday, dragged down by month-end dollar demand and foreign fund outflows. Analysts said the RBI, which was keeping the rupee steady by 2-day support, may allow the rupee to weaken slightly to unwind the slightly real effective exchange rate and keep the currency competitive at the interbank foreign exchange market. The local unit opened at 83.72 and touched an intra-day high of 83.66 and a low at 83.78 against the dollar. It finally settled at record closing low level of 83.78 against the US currency, down 7 paisa from the previous close. After App War, it's time for Map War, with homegrown firm Map My India sharpening its offerings to gain a larger share of the B2C market, and Ola Maps has also recently entering the fray. Google on Thursday unveiled a host of consumer-friendly features in its maps for Indian users. The new features include navigating narrow roads while driving four-wheelers, flyover call-outs, and providing information about electric vehicle charging stations. In the B2B segment, Google has already slashed rates for developers by up to 70%. The new features will not only enable Google Maps users to figure out narrow roads while driving, but also clear the confusion on whether to take a flyover or stay on the service road. We actually do not focus on our competitors. We have been working for a while to make sure our infrastructure pricing systems are localized and adapted to the needs of our partners in India. Then the Vice President and GM at Google Maps said at a press briefing. The new features reaffirm our commitment of making digital mapping even more helpful for users, businesses, developers, and society at large. To address the issue on narrow roads, Google has developed an AI model specifically for Indian roads that incorporates multiple signal satellite imagery, street view, and other information like road types, distance between buildings, paved section, etc. For information of EV charging stations, Google has collaborated with companies such as Electric Pay, Ather, Kazam, and Static to add authoritative information for over 8,000 charging stations. We are seeing a real surge in EV adaptation in India, both for cars and two-wheelers, and we want to make sure that EV drivers have the information they need, Lalita Ramani, General Manager of Google Maps India, said. Donald Trump unleashed a barrage of attacks lines Wednesday against his likely new rival, Vice President Kamala Harris, whom he called his new victim to defeat, and accused of deceiving the public about President Joe Biden's ability to run for a second term. The rally in North Carolina marked his first public campaign even since Biden dropped out of the 24 matchup and Harris became the Democrats' likely nominee. So now we have a new victim to defeat, lying Kamala Harris, Trump said, labeling her the most incompetent and far-left vice president in America's history. Trump called her a radical left lunatic and said she was crazy for her positions on abortion and on immigration. He also mispronounced her first name repeatedly, a denigrating approach to the first black woman and person from South Asian descent likely to lead a major party's presidential ticket. Trump's speech signaled the next stage for the campaign may be specifically brutal and personal, even as some GOP leaders warned Republican allies not to use overtly racist and sexist attacks against Harris. Trump has ramped up his criticism of the vice president since Biden's abrupt departure, calling Harris the same as Biden but much more radical. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pledged in a scathing speech to Congress on Wednesday to achieve total victory against Hamas and denounced American opponents of the war in Gaza as idiots. Making a combative stance in a visit to the Biden administration has hoped will yield progress in the negotiations to end the fighting. Netanyahu used a high-profile address to a joint meeting of Congress to emphasize long-standing and close ties between the United States and Israel. But the speech put in sharp relief the divisions in American society stirred by the war, with dozens of Democratic lawmakers boycotting the address and thousands of protesters outside the Capitol. Some of the protests near the Capitol turned chaotic. Then included one near the Capitol grounds at Union Station, where protesters spray-painted marble statuary and replaced American flags with Palestinian ones. Officers on streets surrounding the Capitol brawled with demonstrators swinging batons, spraying tear gas. Speaking to nearly an hour to frequent applause from US lawmakers as well as stony silence from many leading Democrats, Netanyahu said the US has a shared interest in the country's fight against Hamas. Paris is said to be the greenest games in the history. The Games Organizing Committee has pledged to halve the Olympics' carbon emission from roughly 3.5 million tons each in Tokyo 20, Rio 26, in Rio 16 and London 12 to 1.75 tons this time around. All evidence points to the planet being in a climate emergency driven by anthropogenic emissions of greenhouse gases. In this context, mega sporting events with their massive carbon footprint might appear to be profligacy humanity can ill afford. At the same time, such events can also act as opportunities to further the fight against climate change. Mega events like the Olympic Games and the FIFA World Cup require massive public investment. Therefore, they should be good stewards of the public interest. Assistant Professor of Sport Ecology, University of Toronto, and the founder industry lead of the Sport Ecology Group told, these events must do a better job for reducing their extraordinarily large carbon footprints and find ways to accelerate sustainable transitions in the places they are hosted. This is not just important for the events' reputations, but in a world which is on fire, important to justify them taking place. She said in this context, Paris Olympics promises to be game-changing. Paris Olympics will majorly be powered by renewable energy sources like geothermal and solar power. A number of climate-friendly moves are being implemented. Paris Olympics is trying to promote plant-based, local and sustainable food. The Food and Agriculture Organization has estimated that the meat and dairy industries account for 18% global emissions. All food-related infrastructure developed for the Games will see reuse after the Olympics. Most Olympic venues are easily accessible by public transport. Paris will run special service to ensure that tourists do not have trouble getting around. Moreover, Paris had developed 1,000 km of dedicated cycle lanes with an additional 3,000 pay-as-you-go cycle available for rent during the Games. Unlike London, which built 8 new venues for the Olympics, and Tokyo, which constructed 11 new sites, 95% of the events in the Paris Games will be held in existing buildings or temporary infrastructure. The competition venue that Paris is building, the Aquatic Center in Saint-Denis, is solar powered and uses recycled natural bio-based building material. Globally, the construction industry is being the highest emitters, responsible for 37% of global emission. While the high temperature in Paris have forced organizers to install 2,500 temporary cooling units for athletes instead of being AC free as originally planned, the athletes' living arrangements are fairly sparse. Their mattresses are made from recycled fishing nets and beds made from reinforced cardboard. Significant amount of the furniture being used during the Games is rented rather than bought and will see reuse after the Olympics. The 2,800 new apartments in the Olympic Village will be converted to homes after the event. The Olympics will host 15,000 athletes, 45,000 volunteers and 26,000 media professionals. Paris expects to host more than 10 million tourists during the games. This means a lot of air travel and consequently a lot of emissions. It's great to see the ambition of Paris Olympics to be very low impact, but to say that it will be carbon positive is just not realistic in the context of an international sporting event with hundreds of thousands of tourists and participants. Or wrote in her book Warming Up How Climate Change is Changing Sport, published this year. The organizers have said the Paris Olympic has developed a funding program for projects aimed at avoiding and capturing carbon emissions, which will aim to offset unavoidable games related emissions. Offsetting is a new way of individual or organization to compensate for the environmental cost of their actions by funding projects which will plant trees, rejuvenate forests, etc. Many experts, however, say that offsetting amounts to little more than greenwashing. It gives you a guilt-free feeling, a feeling that you have done your part to be carbon neutral. In reality, many offsetting projects are not implemented, and even if they are, there is no monitoring to ensure that they continue to work as intended. Climate activists said Paris Olympics will still go down as the most climate-friendly Olympics in the history and provide a blueprint for major sporting events in the future. As Orr put it, the development for the games, such as the use of rented and reused material wherever possible, and improvement in public transit infrastructure and cycle lanes will all offer long-term benefits to Parisians.